I spent most of my life working on the farm, but Father gave it to my brother. The sky opened up that morning like God himself was trying to wash away our little farm. I was 19, soaked to the bone, and digging post holes for a fence that probably wouldn't survive the next tornado season. My hands were blistered raw despite the thick work gloves Dad insisted I wear. Calluses build character, he'd say, though he hadn't dug a hole himself in years. When my shovel hit something hard, I wasn't surprised. This land was more rock than soil. The metallic clang was different, though, not the usual limestone chunk. I pried at it for a second before the rain started coming down harder. Just another frustrating rock on this challenging farm. I muttered, tossing the shovel aside. I'd come back later when the downpour stopped. Little did I know that patch of dirt would change everything. Every morning starts the same way on our farm. My alarm blares at 5 a.m., and I'm out of bed before the second ring. Dad doesn't tolerate laziness. The cows need milking. The chickens need feeding. And there's always some fence that needs mending. It's been this way since Mom passed when I was 8. Just me, Dad, and a few dozen acres of struggling farmland outside of Burlington, Iowa. I never minded the work. There's something peaceful about watching the sun rise over cornfields while the rest of the world is still dreaming. The farm may not be much, but one day it would be mine. At least that's what I thought. Dad, Thomas to everyone else, runs a place with military precision. Every task has its time. Every tool has its place. He's not a bad man, just hardened by years of drought, debt, and disappointment. When Mom died, something in him died too. The laughter disappeared, replaced by grunts and one-word commands. Michael, the feed delivery is late again. Call him while I finish the east field. That's about as close to a conversation as we get most days. I nodded, watching him climb into our ancient John Deere tractor. The thing was held together with duct tape and determination, but Dad refused to replace it. No sense in going into debt for shiny new equipment when the old stuff still works, he'd say. He was right about that much. Debt had swallowed up half the farms around us. Corporate agriculture was steamrolling family operations like ours. But we were hanging on, barely. While Dad saw the farm as a burden, I saw its potential. With some modernization and a few calculated risks, we could do more than just survive. We could thrive. But Dad wasn't interested in my ideas. He had another son for the thinking part. Jacob, my older brother by 3 years, was Dad's pride and joy. While I was fixing fences in the rain, Jacob was studying finance at Northwestern University in Chicago. Dad never missed a chance to mention it. Your brother called today. He's making the dean's list again. That boy is going places. I nodded and kept eating my dinner. What was I supposed to say? That I was happy shoveling cow waste while Jacob prepared for his cushy office job? That I didn't mind being the backup son. The insurance policy to keep the family land if Jacob's big city dreams panned out? Education is the future, Michael. You could have gone to community college at least. I'd heard this speech 100 times. What Dad never seemed to understand was that someone had to stay and work the farm. Someone had to wake up at 5 a.m. to milk the cows. Someone had to be the son who sacrificed his dreams so the other could chase his. The worst part? I love this place. Every weathered fence post, every acre of corn, even the dilapidated farmhouse with its creaking floors and drafty windows felt like an extension of myself. This land was in my blood. But to Dad, that love made me simple, unambitious. The only person who seemed to understand was our neighbor, Mr. Carlson. His farm was even smaller than ours, just 20 acres with a weather-beaten house and a large barn that leaned slightly to the left. At 78, he was too old to work the land, so he rented it out to a corn producer from the next county. What made Mr. Carlson's place special wasn't his land. It was what he kept in his barn. Hidden under a tarp and decades of dust sat a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO. The car was covered in rust spots. The red paint faded to a dull orange in places, but you could still make out its sleek, beautiful lines. My one extravagance, he told me the first time he showed me the car, bought it after I came back from Vietnam. Everyone thought I was crazy spending that kind of money on an Italian sports car. If they thought he was crazy then They'd think he was certifiable now. That heap of rust was worth millions. Collectors would pay anything for it, even in its current condition. But Mr. Carlson refused to sell. I started helping him around his place when I was 15. At first, it was just for extra pocket money. Dad paid me nothing for working our farm. It was my duty to the family. But over time, I grew to cherish those hours at Carlson's. While we worked, he'd tell me stories about his adventures, racing the Ferrari on empty highways in the 70s, traveling through Europe in his youth, the treasures he'd found and lost. We used to play treasure hunters as kids, he told me one afternoon as we repaired his roof. We'd split into teams, bury boxes of baseball cards and coins, draw maps with elaborate clues. Sometimes the maps got lost, and those treasures stayed buried forever. His eyes would light up with childlike mischief when he talked about those days. I soaked up every word, imagining what it would be like to uncover something valuable, something that could change everything. Dad hated that I spent time at Carlson's. Don't you have enough work to do here? Why waste time helping that old fool? The truth was, at Carlson's, I felt appreciated. He listened to my ideas about sustainable farming. He showed me how engines worked, sharing the knowledge he'd gained from decades of tinkering. While Dad saw me as cheap labor, Carlson saw potential. Last summer, Carlson let me start restoring the Ferrari. It was a pipe dream. We both knew it. The parts alone would cost more than our farm was worth. But for a few hours each week, I could forget about the brutal reality of failing crops and mounting bills. I could imagine cruising down coastal highways, the engine purring beneath me. You got good hands, Carlson told me after I managed to disassemble and rebuild the carburetor. Your grandfather was the same way. Best mechanic in 3 counties. I barely remember my grandfather. He died when I was 6, but his auto shop had been legendary in our small town. Dad sold it after he passed. Another family legacy discarded. Sometimes I wondered if I'd inherited more from my grandfather than my father. The thought both comforted and troubled me. As the day wore on, I found myself thinking about my future on this farm. The endless cycle of chores, the struggle to make ends meet, the feeling that no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough in Dad's eyes. My mind wandered to Carlson's stories about adventure and possibility. The contrast between his colorful past and my monotonous present couldn't be more stark. He'd seen the world, taken risks, lived a life worth telling stories about. What stories would I have to tell when I reached his age? As I looked across our property, the field stretching out to meet the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more waiting for me than just being the son who stayed behind. Was there something valuable here that everyone else had missed? Some potential that only I could see? I looked back at our farmhouse, where Dad was probably tallying up bills at the kitchen table, worrying about how we'd make it through another season. Then I glanced down at my calloused hands. For years, I'd poured everything I had into this land, hoping to one day call it mine. But the question that haunted me as evening approached wasn't whether the farm would become mine someday. It was whether it was even worth having at all. And if it wasn't, what would that mean for someone like me, who had never known anything else? Summer hit our farm like it always did, without mercy. By mid-June, the corn was already shoulder-high, and the humidity made even breathing feel like work. I was replacing shingles on our storage shed when I first saw her. A beat-up Toyota pulled into Carlson's driveway, kicking up dust that caught the afternoon sun. A girl stepped out, stretching after what must have been a long drive. Even from a distance, something about her grabbed my attention. Maybe it was a confident way she moved, or maybe it was just that she was the first new person I'd seen in months. When Carlson came out to greet her with a bear hug, I realized this must be Emily, his granddaughter from Chicago. He'd mentioned she might visit this summer, but I hadn't given it much thought. Michael, come meet my granddaughter. Carlson waved me over later that afternoon when I was finishing up my chores. Dad was in town picking up supplies, so I had a rare moment of freedom. Emily was nothing like the farm girls I knew from high school. Her dark hair was cut short, one side longer than the other. She had an artist's eyes, observant, taking everything in. When she smiled and extended her hand, I became acutely aware of how rough and callous mine was. "So you're the neighbor my grandpa keeps talking about," she said. "The one who's helping him with that rusty old car." "It's not just any rusty old car," I replied, surprised at how defensive I felt about the Ferrari. "It's history on wheels." She laughed, and something in my chest tightened. "Grandpa said you'd say that. He thinks you have an old soul trapped in a young man's life." That about summed it up. Over the next few days, Emily became a regular fixture at Carlson's place. She'd sit on an overturned milk crate in the barn, sketching in her notebook while I worked on the Ferrari. Unlike most people, she didn't fill silence with pointless chatter. When she did speak, her words carried weight. "Why do you stay here?" she asked one afternoon. The question caught me off guard. I wiped grease from my hands. "It's complicated." "Let me guess. Family obligation? Fear of the unknown? The American dream of land ownership?" Her directness was both refreshing and unsettling. No one around here spoke like that, laying bare the uncomfortable truths we all pretended not to see. All of the above, I guess, I admitted. Plus, I actually love this place. Or at least, I love what it could be. Emily closed her sketchbook. Potential is a dangerous thing to fall in love with. I thought about that comment for days afterward. On the 4th of July, Carlson invited me to join them for a barbecue. Dad was invited too, but he declined, saying he had accounts to go over. The truth was, he and Carlson had been cool toward each other for years, though neither would tell me why. Emily and I sat on Carlson's porch, watching fireworks explode over the cornfields while her grandfather dozed in his rocking chair. The distant pops and crackles mingled with the chorus of cicadas and frogs from the creek. "My family wants to sell the Ferrari," she said suddenly. "Mom thinks it's just taking up space, and Grandpa could use the money for his retirement." My stomach dropped. What does Carlson think? He's torn. That car represents his youth, his freedom, but he knows it needs work that he can't afford. She turned to look at me, her face illuminated by a burst of red and blue from the sky. He said, "You might have ideas." The trust Carlson placed in me meant more than he could know. While Dad saw me as nothing but a farmhand, Carlson saw me as someone with a brain worth consulting. The Ferrari became our project that summer. Emily knew nothing about cars, but she was a quick learner. She'd hand me tools before I asked for them, research parts online, and sketch designs for restoration. We spent hours in that barn, emerging only when hunger or duty called. Those were the best days of my life. For once, I wasn't just a kid who stayed behind. I was someone with knowledge and skills that mattered. Every time Emily looked at me with admiration after I explained some mechanical concept, my chest swelled with something unfamiliar: pride. Dad, of course, noticed my frequent absences. "The corn needs irrigation, and you're playing mechanic with that city girl," he said one night at dinner. The disgust in his voice was unmistakable. I finished all my chores. I replied, keeping my eyes on my plate. "And her name is Emily. You think I don't see what's happening? You're getting ideas above your station, just like your grandfather did." That got my attention. Dad rarely mentioned his father. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just remember where your responsibilities lie. This farm doesn't run itself. As July melted into August, a sense of dread began to build inside me. Emily would be leaving soon for her sophomore year at art school. The knowledge of her impending departure hung over everything like a storm cloud. One evening, we took a break from the Ferrari and walked along the creek that divided our properties. The setting sun painted everything gold, making even our modest farmland look magical. What if we got the Ferrari running? Emily asked. Not perfect, but just enough to drive. That would take a minor miracle, I replied, and about $10,000 in parts. But if we did, she persisted, where would you go? I'd never truly allowed myself to consider the question. My life had always been defined by boundaries, the edges of our property, the limits of Dad's patience, the confines of small-town expectations. West, I said finally. I'd drive west until I hit the Pacific. See the mountains, the deserts, the ocean. She smiled. Take me with you. The words were spoken lightly, but they landed with the weight of an anvil. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different life, one where I made my own decisions, followed my own path, one with Emily beside me. Reality came crashing back the next morning when Dad confronted me in the barn. He'd found the carburetor parts I'd been cleaning for Ferrari. "So this is where my tool money went," he said, holding up a brass float valve. "You've been stealing from the farm to fix up that worthless heap of metal." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I bought those with my own money. The money Carlson pays me. Money you should be putting back into this place. Your place. Or have you forgotten that? Something inside me snapped. Years of resentment, of feeling invisible next to Jacob, of having my dreams dismissed. It all came pouring out. My place? This has never been my place. It's always been yours and Jacob's. I'm just a help. Dad's face darkened. "That's not true, and you know it. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked what I want? What my plans are? It's always Jacob this, Jacob that. Jacob's going to save the farm with his fancy degree. At least Jacob appreciates what he has." Dad shouted. "He's not chasing fantasies with some city girl who'll be gone before the harvest." The mention of Emily crossed a line. "Her name is Emily, and she sees more potential in me than you ever have." I stormed out before he could respond, my heart hammering against my ribs. In 19 years, I'd never spoken to my father that way. The shock on his face would have been satisfying if it wasn't also terrifying. What had I done? Emily found me by the creek, skipping stones with more force than necessary. "I heard," she said simply, sitting beside me on the bank. Sounds like it was intense. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she added after a moment. The words felt like ice water in my veins. Mom called. "There's some housing issue at school I need to deal with. Tomorrow, not next week as planned. Tomorrow." "I don't want to go," she whispered. "But I have to." I knew then that I was facing crossroads. Emily represented everything I'd never allowed myself to want. Freedom, possibility, a life beyond the fences of our farm. But she was leaving and I was staying. That was the reality we'd both been avoiding all summer. The next morning, I drove Emily to the bus station in town. We barely spoke during the 20-minute ride, both of us wrestling with things left unsaid. When the bus pulled in, she turned to me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Come with me," she said, not as a question, but as a challenge. For one wild, heart-stopping moment, I considered it. I could step onto that bus, leave everything behind. No more 5 a.m. alarms. No more struggling to prove my worth to a father who'd never see it. No more feeling like I was drowning in place. But then I thought of Dad's face at dinner last night, the hurt beneath the anger, the farm that, despite everything, was in my blood. And I knew I couldn't. "I can't," I said. "Not yet." She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "The Ferrari will still be here when I come back," she said, but we both knew she wasn't talking about the car. I watched her board the bus, taking a piece of me with her. As it pulled away, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The farm hadn't changed. Dad hadn't changed. But I had. The call came 3 days later. Jacob, the golden child, the keeper of Dad's dreams, was coming home. Not just for a visit. He was moving back. Fresh out of college with his finance degree, he had big plans for the farm. Dad was ecstatic. "Your brother is going to modernize our operation," he announced at dinner. "Turn this place into a real business. That's what education gets you, vision." Each word was a twist of the knife. I'd been here, working this land every single day while Jacob was away enjoying college life. Now, he was swooping in to save the day with his spreadsheets and business models. "See what real success looks like." Dad continued, oblivious to my silence. "Jacob's got prospects, connections. He's going places." I pushed away from the table, appetite gone. The walls of the farmhouse seemed to close in around me, suffocating in their familiarity. Was this really all there was for me? To be the farmhand in my brother's grand vision? Standing on the porch that night, looking out at the fields I knew like the back of my hand, I couldn't shake Emily's words. Potential is a dangerous thing to fall in love with. Was I in love with what this farm could be? Or was I just afraid of what I could be without it? The old Ferrari in Carlson's barn called to me like a siren song. It represented everything I'd never had: freedom, adventure, the open road. Could it be my ticket out of these family chains? And if it was, did I have the courage to take it? Jacob returned home with the confidence of a conquering hero. His college degree was like a golden ticket, and he flashed it around as if our small farming community should bow at his feet. He'd gained weight in college. The freshman 15 had turned into the senior 30, but he carried himself like he owned the place, which, as it turned out, he soon would. Dad insisted on a special dinner to welcome the prodigal son. I spent the afternoon preparing one of our best chickens and harvesting the freshest vegetables while Jacob lounged on the porch, telling Dad about his grand vision for the farm. He wanted to pivot to organic certification, establish a farm-to-table operation, and leverage social media for direct sales. Terms I'd suggested years ago, only be met with Dad's dismissive grunt. The unfairness of it burned in my gut, but I kept quiet. After my blow-up a few days earlier, Dad and I had settled into an uneasy truce. I couldn't afford another explosion, not when I was still sorting through my feelings about Emily's departure. Dinner that night was a masterclass in favoritism. Dad hung on Jacob's every word, nodding appreciatively at suggestions that would cost more money than we'd seen in the last 5 years combined. We'll need to invest in new equipment, Jacob announced between bites. The old stuff just won't cut it if we want to compete. Dad nodded as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world, despite lecturing me for years about the virtue of making do with what we had. And we should convert the east field to alfalfa. Better profit margins. That was too much. The east field has the best soil for corn, I interjected. We've always gotten our highest yield there. Jacob looked at me like I was a child interrupting the adults. That's the old way of thinking, Mike. The market for organic alfalfa is booming. Before I could respond, Dad cleared his throat. He had that look, the one that meant he'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. My stomach tightened. "Boys, I've been thinking about the future of this farm," he began, eyes fixed on his plate. "I'm not getting any younger, and it's time to make some arrangements." I held my breath. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. After all my years of sweat, all the mornings I'd risen before the sun, all the equipment I'd repaired with baling wire and determination, this was when it would finally pay off. "Jacob, I've talked to the lawyer in town. Once the harvest is in, I'm signing the farm over to you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I must have misheard. "What?" Dad finally looked up. "Your brother has the education to take this place forward. He understands business, financing modern methods. And what about me?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like I was hearing myself from underwater. "What about the 19 years I put into this place while he was gone?" Dad's face hardened. "You can stay on, of course. We'll always need hands to work the land. Hands, not a partner, not an heir, just hands." Jacob had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he didn't protest. Of course not. He was getting everything handed to him on a silver platter. I always thought. I couldn't finish. What I thought, that loyalty and hard work meant something? That Dad saw me as more than just free labor? "This is what's best of the farm," Dad said firmly, as if that settled everything. And maybe it did, because in that moment, I realized a painful truth. Dad didn't love me or Jacob. He loved the farm. We were just tools to keep it going, some more valuable than others. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I'd go to Carlson. He'd understand. Maybe I could work for him full-time, help restore the Ferrari. At least there I was appreciated for my skills, not just my strong back. The morning was unusually cool for August, a hint of fall in the air. I skipped my chores for the first time in years. Let Jacob milk the cows at the farm was his now. I practically ran to Carlson's place, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe I could convince him to sell the Ferrari once we fixed it. We could split the profits, enough for him to retire comfortably and for me to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere with no Jacob, no Dad, and maybe, if I was lucky, somewhere with Emily. The house was quiet when I arrived, which was odd. Carlson was usually up with the birds. I knocked, but there was no answer. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in, calling his name. The stillness that greeted me felt wrong. Carlson's house was never silent. There was always a radio playing or the sound of him puttering around. But now there was nothing but the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. I found him in his favorite armchair by the window, a book open in his lap, looking for all the world like he'd just dozed off. But I knew instantly. The unnatural stillness, the waxy pallor of his skin. Mr. Carlson was gone. The coroner later said it was his heart, quick and painless. A blessing, really, but standing there in that silent room, looking at the man who'd been more of a father to me than my own, it didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like the universe was determined to take away everyone who ever believed in me. The days that followed passed in a blur. I went through the motions, feeding animals, fixing equipment, avoiding Dad and Jacob. At night, I'd sneak over to Carlson's barn just to sit with a Ferrari, my one remaining connection to the old man and to Emily. I was there when she returned for the funeral, her face pale and drawn. Her father, Robert, a stocky man with Carlson's jawline but none of his warmth, was with her. He barely acknowledged me, too busy on his phone discussing the assets with someone. The funeral was small. Carlson had outlived most of his friends. Emily stood beside me at the graveside, her hand occasionally brushing mine, a silent communication of shared grief. Her father spent most of the service checking his watch. After the last mourners had left, Robert approached me in the parking lot. "You're the neighbor kid who's been working on that old car," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Your father and I were restoring it." Robert snorted. Restoring is a generous word for what's happening to that heap. I had a guy come look at it this morning. Says it's too far gone for economical restoration. My heart sank. That's not true. The chassis is solid and the engine... Kid, that Ferrari needs at least $100,000 in parts and professional labor. You think I've got that kind of cash lying around? Or the time to deal with it? He shook his head. I've got a buyer offering $150K for it as is. That's a win in my book. $150,000. For a car worth millions if properly restored. It was highway robbery. "You can't do that," I blurted out. "Your father loved that car. It meant something to him." "My father loved a lot of impractical things," Robert replied coldly. "That's why he died a poor man. I'm not making the same mistake." Emily appeared at her father's side, her eyes apologetic. "I tried to talk him out of it," she whispered. "But he's executor of the estate. It's his decision." Robert checked his phone again. "We're listing property next week, too. Should move fast in this market." And just like that, everything Carlson had built, everything he'd loved, was being dismantled and sold off piece by piece. The farm where he'd spent his life, the car he'd cherished, all of it reduced to dollar signs by a son who couldn't be bothered to visit him more than once a year. The rain started again that afternoon, heavy and relentless. It matched my mood perfectly as I returned to our farm, soaked to the skin but too numb to care. Jacob was in the kitchen with Dad, spreadsheets spread across the table, planning their bright future. Neither looked up when I entered. I might as well have been a ghost. The rage that had been building inside me needed an outlet. I grabbed a shovel from the mudroom and stormed back out into the downpour. If I couldn't fix anything else in my life, I could at least finish the fence I'd started weeks ago. The physical labor was a relief. Each thrust of the shovel into mud a small act of defiance against a world determined to take everything from me. The rain washed away my tears of frustration, leaving only grim determination. That's when it happened. Just like that day weeks earlier, my shovel struck something metal. But this time, instead of dismissing it as a rock, I dropped to my knees in the mud and began digging with my bare hands. It was a box, a small metal container about the size of a cigar case, with ornate engravings obscured by dirt and corrosion. My hands trembled as I pried it open, half expecting to find it empty or filled with mold. Instead, I found a folded piece of yellow paper and a small leather pouch. The paper was a note written in a child's careful hand. Congratulations! You found our secret treasure. Finders keepers. I smiled despite myself, remembering Carlson's stories about buried treasures. This must be one of those long-forgotten childhood caches. The leather pouch contained a few items, some old baseball cards, a couple foreign coins, and what looked like an old silver dollar. I almost dismissed it all as worthless junk until something caught my eye. The date on the silver coin, 1794. Even with my limited knowledge of coins, I knew that was old, really old. America was barely a country in 1794. I carefully tucked everything back into box and hurried to the barn, rain forgotten. Our old desktop computer was painfully slow, but eventually I found what I was looking for. The coin was a flowing hair silver dollar, the first dollar coin ever issued by the United States federal government. Only about 1,800 were ever minted, and most were lost to time. The few that remained were among the most valuable coins in existence. My heart raced as I read further. In 2013, one of these coins had sold at auction for over $10 million. $10 million. I sat back, stunned. It couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. But what if it was? What if, by some miracle, this was the universe balancing the scales? I hid the box in my bedroom, behind a loose baseboard that had been my childhood hiding spot for Halloween candy. I needed time to think, to plan. If the coin was genuine, and that was a massive if, it could change everything. I could buy the Ferrari from Robert before he sold it off for pennies on the dollar. I could start my own garage or farm or whatever I wanted. I could be free of Dad's disappointment and Jacob's shadow. But the thought that kept returning, the one that warmed me more than any fantasy of wealth, was that I could drive to Chicago and tell Emily in person that everything had changed. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt something dangerous and unfamiliar. Hope. The universe had dealt me a cruel hand these past weeks. First with Dad's betrayal, then with Carlson's death. But maybe, just maybe, it had also given me a way out. As the rain drummed against my window, I turned the coin over and over my fingers. It was tarnished and worn, but beautiful in its way. A piece of history, a fragment of a young nation's beginning. The question now was what to do with it. The smart move would be to get it authenticated quietly, sell it through proper channels, and use the money to build a new life far from here. But there was another path, a darker one that whispered to me from the corners of my mind. I could use the money to buy the farm out from under Jacob, to show Dad what mistake he'd made, to take what should have been mine all along, revenge or freedom, the farm or the Ferrari, the past or the future. As dawn broke over the cornfields, I still didn't have an answer, but for the first time in my life, I had a choice. By morning, I'd made my decision. Maybe it wasn't the smart choice or the safe choice, but it was mine. I packed my belongings into 2 duffel bags, clothes, a few books, and a metal box containing what might be my ticket to freedom. I didn't own much for someone who'd lived 19 years in the same place. That realization alone told me everything I needed to know about my life here. Dad found me loading my truck. His face darkened as he realized what was happening. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, blocking my path to the driver's side door. "Away," I replied simply. "This isn't my place anymore. You made that clear. So you're just running off? Leaving all your responsibilities behind because your feelings got hurt?" The unfairness of it made me laugh. "My responsibilities? You gave the farm to Jacob. Remember? I'm just hands now, and these hands are finding work elsewhere." Dad's face flushed red. "I raised you better than this." "No, you didn't raise me at all. You had me working from the moment I could walk. There's a difference." I tried to step around him, but he grabbed my arm. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he said the words that would echo in my head for months to come. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back. This family has no room for quitters." I looked him straight in the eye. This family has no room for me either way. Jacob appeared on the porch, watching our confrontation with thinly disguised satisfaction. "Where you going to go, Mike?" You've got no education, no skills except shoveling cow waste and fixing fences. I've got more real-world skills than you'll ever have with your fancy degree. I shot back. Yeah, good luck finding someone who'll pay you for them, he sneered. You belong with the scrap metal and broken-down machinery. It's all you're good for. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. My answer would come in time, and it would be sweeter than any comeback I could think of now. The drive to Chicago took just over 4 hours, but it felt like crossing into another world. The familiar cornfields and small towns gave way to highways crowded with semis, and eventually the sprawling urban landscape of America's third-largest city. The skyscrapers loomed like mountains made of glass and steel, reflecting the late summer sun. I was terrified and exhilarated. For the first time in my life, no one knew where I was or what I was doing. No one was waiting for me to milk cows or fix equipment. No one was comparing me to my brother. I texted Emily from a gas station outside Iowa City, asking if we could meet. She responded almost immediately with her address and a string of excited emojis. The thought of seeing her again was the only thing keeping my anxiety at bay as I navigated the unfamiliar city streets. Her apartment was in a converted warehouse on the edge of an artsy neighborhood. When she opened the door, her smile made the whole terrifying journey worth it. "I can't believe you're actually here," she said, pulling me into a hug that lingered just long enough to make my heart race. "What happened? Is everything okay?" Over cheap takeout Chinese food on her tiny balcony, I told her everything. Dad betrayal, and finally, the coin. I'd brought it with me, wrapped carefully in a handkerchief. Her eyes widened as she examined it. "This could really be worth something," she said. "My roommate's boyfriend is a history major who works part-time at the Field Museum. He might know someone who could look at this." 2 weeks later, I sat in the office of Marcus Simmons, one of the foremost coin experts in the Midwest. The small man with wire-rimmed glasses had spent nearly an hour examining the silver dollar, occasionally muttering to himself and making notes. "Well, Mr. Fletcher," he finally said, looking up, "what you have here is indeed a 1794 flowing-haired dollar." My heart leapt. "So it's real?" "Oh, it's quite real, and in remarkably good condition for having been buried in the ground. Not mint condition by any means. I'd grade around VF30, but still extraordinarily valuable." "How valuable?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "It's difficult to say precisely without putting it to auction, but based on recent sales of similar specimens, I would estimate somewhere between $7 and $9 million. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Million? With an M?" "Indeed. This is one of the rarest and most desirable coins in American numismatics. The $1,794 was the first silver dollar ever minted by the United States. They're exceptionally rare. Only about 150 are known to still exist in any condition." I must have looked like I was about to pass out, because he quickly poured me a glass of water. "Perhaps we should discuss next steps," he said kindly. "I assume you're interested in selling?" All I could do was nod. The next month was a blur of paperwork, authentication processes, and meetings with auction house representatives. Emily was by my side for all of it, her steady presence keeping me grounded when the reality of my situation threatened to overwhelm me. "You know the craziest part?" I told her one night as we walked along Lake Michigan. "It's not just a coin. Carlson's baseball cards and those other old coins in box, they're worth money too. Not millions, but tens of thousands." She squeezed my hand. "It's like the universe is making up for everything at once." "Or setting me up for some massive cosmic prank," I replied. "Always the optimist," she teased. But it wasn't a prank. 6 weeks after leaving the farm, I sat in a private room at the auction house, watching via closed-circuit TV as my coin went up for bid. Emily clutched my hand so tightly it hurt as the numbers climbed higher and higher. When the gavel finally fell at $8.2 million, we both sat in stunned silence. "What are you going to do now?" she whispered. I knew the answer immediately. "I'm going to buy that Ferrari." It took some convincing, but Robert finally agreed to sell me the Ferrari for the $150K he'd been offered by the other buyer. He clearly thought I was insane, but the certified check changed his mind about arguing. Your money, your mistake, he said as we signed the paperwork. That thing will bleed you dry. Maybe he was right, but as I looked at the Ferrari under its dusty cover, I didn't see a money pit. I saw Carlson's dream. I saw Emily's sketches. I saw my future. With my newfound wealth, I rented a professional garage space in Chicago's industrial district and set to work. The restoration became my obsession. I hired experts to consult on the trickiest aspects, but insisted on doing most of the work myself. This wasn't just about restoring a car. It was about honoring Carlson and proving something to myself. The process wasn't easy. Vintage Ferrari parts weren't exactly available at the local auto shop. Each component had to be hunted down across the globe or custom fabricated by specialists. The engine alone took 4 months to rebuild. The original Weber carburetors cost more than my first truck. The correct shade of Ferrari red, Rosso Corsa, had to be specially mixed to match the original 1962 formula. Emily visited the garage almost daily, bringing coffee and sketching the car in various stages of restoration. She'd started incorporating the Ferrari into her art school projects, and to my surprise, her professors were impressed. They think I'm making some profound statement about American agricultural decline versus Italian mechanical artistry. She laughed. I didn't have the heart to tell them I just really like drawing this car. Winter in Chicago was a shock after Iowa's relatively mild seasons. The wind off the lake cut through my heaviest jacket, like it was tissue paper. But the garage was warm, and the work kept me focused. I rented a small apartment nearby. Nothing fancy despite my bank account. Old habits die hard. The hardest parts of the restoration were the setbacks. The transmission specialist in California, who disappeared with a $30,000 deposit. The custom-made windshield that arrived shattered. The leather for the seats that was the wrong shade of tan. Twice. Each problem tested my resolve, but I refused to quit. Somewhere along the way, the Ferrari had become more than just a car. It was my redemption, my statement to the world, and to my family, that I wasn't just a farmhand who couldn't cut it. 1 year and 2 months after I'd left the farm, the Ferrari was complete. The transformation was breathtaking. What had once been a rust-covered shell was now a gleaming masterpiece of Italian engineering. Every chrome detail polished to mirror finish. Every leather stitch perfect. The engine purred like a content lion when started. I took Emily for first drive, cruising along Lakeshore Drive with the warm May breeze ruffling our hair. The car handled like a dream, responsive and powerful in a way modern vehicles with their computerized systems could never match. This was raw mechanical perfection. Carlson would be so proud. Emily said over the roar of the engine. I just nodded, throat tight with emotion. The car attracted attention everywhere we went. People took photos, gave thumbs up, asked questions at every stoplight. Car enthusiasts recognized it immediately for what it was, automotive royalty. When we returned to the garage, a black Bentley was parked outside. A man in an impeccable suit stood waiting. His Italian loafers probably worth more than all the clothes I'd owned before finding the coin. Mr. Fletcher, he said smoothly, extending a hand. Lawrence Klein. I represent several collectors with an interest in vintage Ferraris. Word of your restoration has reached certain circles. My clients are very interested. I hadn't planned to sell the Ferrari so soon, but Klein's offer to feature it in an exclusive auction of rare automobiles was too good to pass up. The exposure alone would be worth it, he assured me. The auction was held at a private estate outside Greenwich, Connecticut. I felt out of place among the wealthy collectors who examined Ferrari with knowing eyes, discussing provenance and investment potential while sipping champagne. Emily, stunning in a black dress she'd bought for the occasion, fielded questions about the restoration process with more confidence than I could muster. When the bidding started, I held my breath. The auctioneer opened at $5 million, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. Within minutes, it was a battle between a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley and an oil magnate from Texas. At $38 million, the gavel fell. The tech billionaire pumped his fist in victory, while the crowd applauded. I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. In less than 2 years, I'd gone from a broke farmhand to a multimillionaire. The farm that had been my entire life was now just a distant memory. I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. So why did I feel so empty? Back in my hotel suite that night, I stood on the balcony looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Emily had fallen asleep hours ago, exhausted from the excitement of the day. But I couldn't sleep. Something was gnawing at me. My phone contained dozens of missed calls and texts from people who'd suddenly remembered my existence once news of the auction hit the automotive press. But none from the numbers I found myself staring at most often, Dad's and Jacob's. Not that I expected them to call. They had made their position clear. I was dead to them the moment I drove off the farm. But part of me had hoped that my success might change things, that they might see I wasn't just a failure they thought I was. Money had changed everything in my life. I could go anywhere, do anything. I had freedom most people only dream about. But it couldn't buy the one thing I was starting to realize I still wanted, my family's recognition. I thought about the farm, wondering how Jacob's grand plans were working out. Was the East field planted with alfalfa now? Had they bought new equipment? Was Dad still waking up at 5 a.m. to milk cows that were now technically Jacob's? For the first time since leaving, I felt a pull toward home. Not because I missed the grueling work or Dad's criticism, but because despite everything, that land was in my blood. Those fields had shaped me, hardened me, prepared me for the challenges of restoring the Ferrari when anyone else might have given up. As dawn broke over the city, I made a decision. The money hadn't changed who I was inside. I was still Michael Fletcher, son of Thomas, grandson of a mechanic, born and raised on Iowa soil. I had proven to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. Now I had to decide. Was it enough to know that for myself? Or did I need to go back and show them? And if I did go back, would it be to flaunt my success and satisfy some need for revenge? Or would it be to heal the wounds that had driven me away in the first place? The question swirled in my mind as I watched the sun rise over the unfamiliar horizon. I was richer than I'd ever imagined possible, surrounded by luxury, with a beautiful woman asleep in the next room who somehow saw value in me long before anyone else did. But as I stood there, part of me was still in those Iowa fields, still that boy with dirt under his fingernails and determination in his heart. Could money really change who you are at your core, or just reveal it? 3 years can change everything or nothing at all. For me, it was both. My life had transformed beyond recognition. Luxury apartment in Chicago, investment portfolio that made my financial advisor giddy, and a vintage automobile restoration business that had quickly become the talk of the collector world. Emily and I were partners in everything now, her artistic eye complementing my mechanical skills perfectly. But underneath the success, that nagging pull toward home never quite disappeared. I'd catch myself checking Iowa farm reports or looking up real estate listings in my hometown, though I never admitted this to Emily. Then the call came. I was in the middle of inspecting a 1955 Mercedes Gullwing when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, local Iowa area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Hello? The voice on the other end was immediately recognizable, though I'd never heard it sound so broken. Michael, it's your father. I sat in stunned silence as Dad explained the situation. Jacob's grand plans of farm had been disastrous from the start. The pivot to organic certification had cost a fortune with no immediate return. The new equipment he'd financed sat idle most of the year, while interest payments mounted. He leveraged everything, Dad explained, his voice cracking. Took out loans against the house, the land, everything. Now the bank's coming for it all. I closed my eyes, picturing our kitchen table covered in past due notices instead of Mom's old checkered tablecloth. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. He wants to sell. Says it's the only way out of the debt. The pause that followed contained a lifetime of pride being swallowed. And he wants to put me in a retirement community. Says he can't take care of me anymore. The irony was almost too perfect. After all those years of Jacob being the golden child, he betrayed Dad just as thoroughly as Dad had betrayed me. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, all I felt was a hollow ache. He burned through everything so fast. Dad continued. I never thought. I was wrong, Michael, about a lot of things. In the background, I could hear the familiar creak of his rocking chair, the same one he'd sat in every evening for as long as I could remember, reading farm journals by the soft glow of the floor lamp Mom had picked out decades ago. I know it's too late. I know you moved on to better things. But I needed you to hear it from me before it happens. Before strangers take over the land your grandfather cleared with his own 2 hands. I told Emily that night over dinner. She listened quietly, twirling pasta around her fork without eating it. "So what are you going to do?" she asked when I had finished. "Nothing," I replied immediately. "It's not my problem anymore." She gave me that look, the one that saw straight through my defenses. "Really? Because you've been checking Iowa weather reports every morning for 3 years. I sighed. "Habit. And the real estate listings? Just curious. And a subscription to Midwest Farming Today?" I threw up my hands. "Fine. I miss it sometimes. The place, not the people." Her smile was gentle. "The people are the place, Michael. You know that better than anyone." I pushed away from the table and walked to the window. Our apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, the water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Beautiful. But nothing like the rolling fields of home, especially at harvest time when the setting sun turned everything gold. "He doesn't deserve my help," I said finally. "Probably not," Emily agreed. "But you've never done things because people deserve them. You do things because of who you are." 2 days later, we were driving my Range Rover, a practical purchase I'd insisted, despite Emily's teasing about my farm boy roots showing, down the familiar county road toward our farm. My farm. The distinction felt important suddenly. Nothing looked quite right. The fences I'd maintained so meticulously were sagging in places. The old oak by the driveway hadn't been trimmed. And was that a broken window in the barn? Dad was waiting on the porch, looking smaller somehow. Older. The past 3 years had not been kind to him. Jacob's truck was parked haphazardly by the barn, mud splashed up its sides. At least something never changed. He still couldn't park straight. "You came?" Dad said simply as I stepped out of the car. His eyes lingered on Emily, then on the vehicle, taking in the visible signs of our prosperity. "I came," I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. Jacob emerged from the house then, his college weight gain now firmly settled into middle age spread despite being only 25. His face darkened when he saw me. "Well, look who it is. The prodigal son returns." His sneer hadn't changed either. "What's the matter? City life not all it's cracked up to be?" "It's treating me just fine," I replied. "Apparently better than farm life is treating you." Jacob's face flushed red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Managing a farm is complex business. There are market factors, regulatory challenges. Spare me the MBA buzzwords. I cut in. I've seen the books. Dad sent me copies of everything." That shocked him into silence. "Good." I turned back to Dad. "Let's talk inside." The kitchen was exactly as I remembered, right down to the ancient coffee maker gurgling in the corner. We sat at the table, Dad, Jacob, Emily, and me, like some bizarre family reunion. "So you're here to gloat," Jacob said finally, "to watch us crash and burn." I shook my head. "I'm here to buy the farm." The statement hung in the air. Jacob snorted. "Yeah, right. You couldn't afford a single acre." In response, I slid a folded check across the table. Dad's eyes widened as he read the amount. $1 million. I said, "That covers the land, the house, all the equipment, and enough to clear the debt with the bank, plus a cushion for Dad's retirement. His retirement here, not in some facility." Jacob's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "This is some kind of joke. You don't have this kind of money." Emily leaned forward, her voice cool. "Your brother's being quite generous. Actually, the market value is significantly less given the state of the property and the debt load." "Who the hell are you two?" "She's my fiancée," I interrupted, "and a much better business person than you'll ever be." Dad was still staring at the check. "Michael, I don't understand." "How?" "Let's just say I found something valuable on the property before I left. Something worth a lot more than this farm." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "What was it?" "Whatever it was, It was on family land. I deserve a cut. The old me would have exploded at that. The new me just laughed. The only thing you deserve is the opportunity I'm giving you, to walk away from this mess you created without bankruptcy on your record. The paperwork took less than a week. Jacob left the day after signing, heading back to Chicago ironically enough. He didn't say goodbye, just peeled out of the driveway in his mud-splattered truck, a cloud of dust marking his exit from our lives. Dad and I circled each other cautiously those first few days. There was too much history, too many harsh words between us to simply pick up where we'd left off. But slowly, as we worked together to assess what needed fixing most urgently, the old rhythms returned. I was wrong, he said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. About you, about Jacob, about everything. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Your mother would have seen it, he continued. She always knew you had something special. Said you had her father's hands and her father's heart. I don't remember her saying that. I replied, quietly. She didn't say it to you. She said it to me. He looked down at his own weathered hands. I was jealous, I think, of that connection you two had. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was more insight into my father than I'd gotten in 19 years of living under his roof. Emily and I split our time between Chicago and the farm that fall. I hired local contractors to repair the buildings and experienced farmhands to manage the day-to-day operations. Dad insisted on keeping his hand in things, but I made sure he understood this was his home, not his burden anymore. Winter came early that year, blanketing the fields in white. Emily fell in love with the stark beauty of rural Iowa in December, sketching the snow-laden trees and frozen creek. She'd grown up in Chicago's suburbs, and the vastness of open country still amazed her. I think I see now why you couldn't just let this place go, she said one night as we lay in my childhood bed, listening to the wind howl outside. It's in your blood. I pulled her closer. So are you. By spring, we'd settled into a new rhythm. The farm was flourishing under professional management. Dad was healthier than he'd been in years, and Emily and I had big news to share. We gathered everyone for a barbecue on the newly rebuilt deck. Dad, Emily's parents, who had come around after seeing how happy she was, and a few of Carlson's old friends who become fixtures in our expanded family circle. We're engaged, Emily announced, holding up her hand to display the vintage ring we'd found at an estate sale in Vermont. Not as flashy as what my bank account could afford, but perfect for her artistic sensibilities. The cheers and congratulations washed over us like a warm wave. Dad embraced me with tears in his eyes. The first real hug we'd shared since Mom died. But there was more news to share. We're also expanding the business. I added, opening a second restoration garage on the West Coast. This had been Emily's dream. A house on the California coast where she could paint the ocean while I restored classic cars in a state-of-the-art garage. We'd found the perfect property north of San Francisco, with sweeping views and enough land to build exactly what we wanted. You're leaving again? Dad asked, a flash of the old fear crossing his face. Not leaving, I corrected, adding, this will always be home base. Relief softened his features. Good. This place needs you more than you know. He put his hand on my shoulder, the gesture worth more than any words he could have said. In that moment, something healed between us, not completely, but enough to build on. As the party wound down, I found myself looking across the property toward the setting sun. The golden light washed over fields I'd worked since childhood, giving everything a magical glow. It was strange how some things could change so completely while others remained eternal. Emily joined me, slipping her arm through mine. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about how far we've come, I said, and how some journeys take you exactly where you need to be, even when the path isn't what you expected. She smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. That's what makes an adventure. We turned back to our gathering of friends and family, my heart full of contentment I'd never thought possible 3 years ago. 6 months later, Emily and I stood on the deck of our new California home, watching the sun sink into the Pacific. The vista was breathtaking. Cliffs falling away to a secluded beach, waves crashing against ancient rocks, the sky painted in impossible colors. It's perfect, Emily murmured, squeezing my hand. Our main home remained in Iowa, and we returned regularly to check on Dad and the farm. But this place felt magical in its own way, a culmination of dreams I hadn't even known I had until I found that first berry box. Life had taken me on a journey I could never have imagined. That day in the rain, digging fence post holes and cursing my existence. The farm boy had become a successful businessman. The overlooked brother had found his own path. The broken family had begun to heal. Standing there with Emily's hand in mine, watching the last sliver of sun disappear beneath the horizon, I finally realized the truth. The real treasure had never been the coin or the Ferrari or even the farm itself. It was a discovery that I could be more than what others saw in me, that I could define my own worth. In the end, I hadn't needed to escape my roots. I just needed to grow beyond them while keeping them intact. What are you thinking about? Emily asked, resting her head on my shoulder. I smiled, pulling her close as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I'm thinking I finally found my place on the map.